Good morning. Today I would like to talk about interpreting personal qualities and abilities and working conditions, which is a talk which I have actually had with University of Tunis Al Manar yesterday, in which in this talk I will be explaining some of these elements relating to interpreting and how interpreting needs to be dealt with. Now, interpreting, I have chosen the title to be a very general title because I don't want to talk about simultaneous interpreting, which is what my specialization is in. I wanted really to talk about it in general, to include all other interpreting types and modes, whether it is actually to do with consecutive, which means the interpreter takes in turn with the speaker and the listener, or with the simultaneous, which is like in the conference, interpreting in the booth. Now, in terms of interpreting, what we need to look at is, I'm just going to actually just show you the PowerPoint so we can follow that matter together. Let me just now there are quite a few questions which I usually ask here about interpreting. Well, this is definitely the element which many students who are training on interpreting have problems with getting to be able to be good and confident interpreters. Now, we need to ask ourselves questions like at the academia, how many of the students focus on translation courses compared to interpreting, or even the content, course content by the programs, and why do they focus more on translation than interpreting? How many interpreting courses are taught, and are they enough to graduate interpreters, confident interpreters? And the focus of interpreting courses, is it on theory or practice in your university? And what percentage is the theory compared to the practice in terms of theory? I'm talking about theories and techniques and strategies. And how do you study interpreting? How many of you as students take up this as a career? And when we say interpreting, what do we mean by that term? Also interpreting in general, not only SI but CI. That's what my lecture today is about. Now, this lecture tries to explain briefly what course content training to include in interpreting programs, competence and other personal qualities of interpreters, and finally, working conditions, stress and health issues. The plan is to talk about professional course content with regards to audiovisual material, training and organizational issues, competence, qualities and abilities that are personal, working conditions and stress. And of course, these are the main points that will be discussed there. Now, in terms of what material to give in a course content, well, trials like Judge Judy or any other kind of TV series about court cases will be very, very useful, because these trials, if the student actually watches them and learns how to be interpreter in court, this will be a good way of learning about the legal interpreting in the legal environment. A second, perhaps a good element here is to watch on websites like UN website, UN TV, meetings from the UN or press conferences from the UN or from the EU perhaps, or Arab League or the GCC websites, where they have English and Arabic and English, and that will be, the vocabulary will improve in terms of politics, of course, in this area. And there is also the interviews that are on television with VIPs like prime ministers and ministers and ambassadors and so on and so forth. So these will be useful as well as in this. It can be also in the medical settings like doctors and nurse, doctor and patient, or even in business meetings and finance. There are also televised conferences, and professional organizations have got also on their websites some sort of material which you can use on YouTube, of course. In terms of training, of course, apprenticeship is good to do. Exercises can be chosen from, can be modeled really on real life tasks, and also, there is also the influence which is growing of foreign language pedagogy on training, as well as, of course, a scientific approach, which is the cognitive process-oriented paradigm, with aspects such as competent skills, strategies, processing capacity management, and the development of expertise. Now, of course, these training, Aracne, which is in 1978 and also in 1984, has actually been among few interpreter educators who have not only turned to fields in training in psycholinguistics and cognitive psychology. And what I mean by cognitive psychology is the level of processing, interactive processing, and capacity constraints of the brain and the memory, of course, as well as the actual theory of education, which can be addressing issues relating to curriculum. That is yet another element there. Now, in terms of training, there is an element of, for example, the level of training, also the density, the duration of training, the level of training, how high is it? Novice? Is it competent, professional, proficiency? Duration, how long are we giving this training to the students? In terms of duration, of course, we can look at it from different ways. Either a duration, how long the student stays in the booth interpreting real time, or a duration as in being in the booth but not necessarily interpreting at the time, or how long they have served in a company, interpreting company, whether they got jobs or don't have jobs to interpret, and maybe shadowing. And there is also the intensity of training, how many hours per day or per week are they interpreting, or we wouldn't say hours, we'll talk about it in minutes. Also, the relative weight of how much professionality we should give to the course content, and how much of the academic part of the course needs to be in there. Now, there are some contentious issues for the training, like whether the simultaneous training, for example, should we do that in the B language? B language being, we have three types of languages. A language is that when you're interpreting into your mother tongue, and B language is your near-native language, and the C language is the language that you understand extremely well, but you may not be able to interpret into very well. So maybe training into a B language might actually train you, whether it's needed or not needed. Also, there's an element of, should we get you proficient in consecutive first before we can move on to train you on simultaneous, the way actually Macintosh is saying in 1999. There are also, now we have talked about a little bit of the content and training. Let's look at competence and other qualities of the interpreters, and we will have also the conditions, working conditions, stress and health issues. Now in competence, of course, there's a complex, but it is complex body in terms of knowledge and skills, how much knowledge and how much skills we should really, for a practice or an occupation to be acknowledged as a profession, it must be perceived to rest on a complex body of knowledge and skills, mastery of which can only be acquired by specialized training. Competence in interpreting can thus be defined as the congruence between task demands, which is performance standards, and qualifications. And here what I mean by, what is meant by that is we have the ability of the availability of the interpreter, i.e. how much of their memory is available and strong in terms of receiving the information flow, and also the requirement that is needed for you at the time of your interpreting. So the requirement needs to be less than your ability. In other words, you should contain the situation that you're in when you're interpreting. In order to be a competent person, you need to have an equal level of, or your capacity, your capabilities should be higher or equal to the requirements that are required of you in the booth. Now, in terms of the qualities and abilities that you need to be good at, according to Sands